다 동마들이야. 아니
First of all,
이게 섬로리야. 아니 섬지 쉬하다 첩지도
I would like to offer you all my greetings.
가상 양감베지 생계 중로 중단 하리 마당.
Yesterday I spoke generally about the origin of the name Karmapa and the origin of the black crown. And about the black crown ceremony. And so I spoke about those in general terms. And so today, unless we begin talking about the autobiographical versus good deeds, we'd never finish teachings. So I will begin speaking about the good deeds today. So generally, there is a catalog of Mikyo Dorje's complete writings compiled by the fifth Shamar, Kunjot Nanak. In the section on the stories of the liberation of Mikyo Dorje, there are 13 for the common perception of disciples of all types, and 5 or 6 for the pure disciples' perception of miraculous events, and so these are listed there. The titles are given. But there are probably other stories of Mikyo Dorje's liberation that are not included in the collected works. For example, in the commentary on the meaning of the good deeds by Sangye Peldrup says, the story of liberation prepared by Aku Atra, the story of liberation by the master Siddha Kempo Shakya Sangye, and the story of liberation by Lama Pönyi. And so he mentions several different stories of Mikyo Dorje's liberation. But in the collected works, other than the one prepared by Aku Atra, the other 2 liberation stories are not found in the collected works. And so now, the title of the text that we are speaking about is listed in the catalog of his complete works as The Life of Mikyo Dorje called Good Deeds, written by himself, and The Praise He Searched Thoroughly. So these are the 2 that we will speak about in this teaching. Now, of these 2, the Praise He Searched Thoroughly later became better known. It is collected in the prayer book for the Kamsan lineage compiled by the 8th Sitter Rinpoche Chögyé Junye. And also there is the Rain of Wisdom, the Ocean of Kaju Songs, that was compiled primarily by Mikyo Dorje, and that also includes the Praise He Searched Thoroughly. So most of you probably know the Praise He Searched Thoroughly. And when I was young, I had to little the Praise He Searched Thoroughly, and the words are such difficult to memorize. The words are so difficult, and so the old lamas from Trungpa said many of the people have difficulty memorizing. So it seems that if the more you get beaten, the easier it is to memorize this praise he searched thoroughly. So this is well known. but both in terms of the topic that it tells and the sticks the words that tell it, the longest and the most complete of these is the autobiographies, is this one, the good deeds. So now this version of the good deeds that we are using now was at the India Institute Library. So at that time, I said that this one, this is a good liberation story, and if you print it, it would be good. And so they published it, and so now they have shared the remaining books that they have with all the monasteries and nunneries, and there's been very beneficial. And also there is the ebook published on Dharma ebooks.org. It's the same as text published by Vajravidya. And so this edition comes from the first volume of the collected works of Mikya Dorje that has been preserved in the Drepung Nichung Hla Kang Library. So generally, we all know that there are the three great places of Drepung, Sera, and Ganden. And so at the great monastery of Drepung, there are many texts marked with as external. They have the word Paya Dachaga the Tibetan word Chi there that are explained there. And most of these old texts they were from the Tsehlagang Monastery in Kompo, the place where the Karmapa's black treasure was kept. And when that was destroyed, they were brought to U, as the great fifth described in his fifth Dalai Lama described in his autobiography. When I was in Tibet in 1996, I went to go visit Beijing and Chonggo and various other places in so there's the Chongyangsi department. They prepared prepared a hotel room for me, and I stayed there. And at that time, there were the attendants who came with me and a few Tibetans who came, and we got together and had some conversation with some Tibetans there, and we had some conversation. And then during this conversation, the attendant said that the Karmapa should go to India, where there are many sacred objects stored in Rumtek that the Karmapa needs to go get from Rumtek Monastery, and so they expressed that wish. So they're really insistent. Later, person came. Okay, so can't you say something? They're being just too insistent. We can't. We need to, in order for you to go to India, diplomatic discussions between India and China. Can you give them some advice? So I said, I'll see if I can. So one day we had a little meeting, and there were the Tibetans, the Tibetans from the offices, the Tibetans who came from Tibet, and we all spoke. And sacred objects of the Black Crown and so forth, if I get them, that's good, but if I don't, then it's fine. Actually, in the past, the Black Crown is It was offered by the Chinese emperor. So maybe you from the Tulku Recognition Office give me a black card, that would be fine. But what I need are all the old Kaju texts that are kept in the Potala and Jaipung and the other libraries in Tibet. If we could please give us permission so that we can read them and so we can read them. And so that's what I asked them. And at that point, and then everyone, the people from the offices, they had a little bit of relief. Oh, that's a great. And they said, oh, we can do that. They said, we'll immediately get a permission, they said. And so when I got back to Tribu Monastery, and said, now you've just thrown it all away in the water. We worked so hard and for a few, insisted so hard for several days and said, now you ruined it all, they said. But don't say whether we could. They said, we can't talk about whether they can go to India or not. They're going to let us go. And so even if the Chinese send us, we don't know if the Indians would respect. But what we really need is what's important are the scriptures and text. So when I got to Tibet, there's someone who we knew from the Tibetan Autonomous Region who helped us. My computer went off. It ran out of power. I thought I was connected to power, but I didn't put it in quite right. It just went completely blank. And so now, okay. So, within the Potala, Norbalinka, and Drechung, Nechung, Thakong, and so forth, we were able to find over 100 old Kaju manuscripts. And so at that point, the person who put the most work in was Tsurpu Khenpo Loya. It was him. And so at that time, there was an old edition of the Fourth Shama's collected works. It was a huge text, a huge book. And so we decided to reprint it, and we wanted to reprint it. But in Lhasa, the technology is not so good. So they had could only do half of a page half of a sheet at a time, and then after they'd copied them, they had to glue the pages together, and so that's how it was. So among all those texts, there were many old manuscripts that had been wrapped in fabric and not opened for 300 years or so. They were sealed with red stamps. Khenpo Loya, he was a Kampa. So he just looked for he gathered up his strength and he went down and came back to Tsurpu carrying a few dozen old manuscripts, saying, he said, oh, we need to print them, and so he brought them back to Tsurpu Monastery. I still remember that day really well. I brought a stick of incense down to the bottom of the staircase to welcome it. And it was the first time in my life that I'd been an incense bearer for someone else. Then in the middle of my quarters, we put together many different tables, and we covered them with silks. And we placed the texts on top of them. And so we arranged them there. So at that time, I was right next to Lagan Drupnam, who I think you all know. When he opened up a volume of Mikya Dorje's collected works, and that Mikya Dorje's collected works, it was put together with held together wooden boards and leather straps. And so the leather straps had been so old, so that when the leather straps were undone, they fell apart into many pieces. And the cloth that the text was wrapped in was so impregnated with dust that when you tugged it with your hands, the dust just billowed from it in clouds. So if you looked at it from outside, you think, oh, you'd have thought that the text inside must have decomposed. But the pages inside had not degraded at all, and they shone as if they gave off light. Now, most of it was handwritten, written by hand, and so we were just really taken by how diligent people of that time were. And we just couldn't help but exclaim, ah, just couldn't help it. And so from that time on, I've always been delighted when I get an opportunity to see the collected works of Mikyo Dorje or the other Karmapas. And so it's something that I really enjoy. So at that point, my quarters were across from the library. And so I'd always go in there and get a text and then read it. But in that library, of course, there are a lot of texts there, but of the collected works of the different Karmapas, there was the collected works of the 13th Karmapa and the collected works of the 15th Karmapa. There wasn't even a single collected work of any other Karmapa. And so I read these many different times, and I read them to many other people as well. And so particular in the 13th Karmapa's collected works, there's a story called The Dharma Taught to the Little Mouse. The story is about teaching Dharma to mice. And in one, there is a mouse who is teaching meditation to the mouse, teaching it to a vole. And the vole couldn't sit and cross-legged. Because it couldn't, so they made a meditation belt from a stalk of grass and put it on, and it was able to sit cross-legged. And so lots of stories like that. So I really enjoyed reading these stories. But this is just reminiscing about the past. In any case, at that time, even though I had the title of Karmapa, I didn't have many opportunities to read Kagyu texts. I never saw them. So how could ordinary monks and nuns have any chance to? They never even saw the texts. How could they read them? So nowadays, the texts are plentiful and they're abundant. And so all of you students in the Shedras, I think you are extremely fortunate. So you must not let this excellent opportunity go to waste. And studying important is really extremely important. Otherwise, even if we thought we should read the text, if we thought we should read something, there was no collected works that we could read. So if you can keep this in mind, I think it's good. Now, the title of the good deeds found in the fifth Karmapa's catalog and the text in the good deeds that we're using are slightly different. So, and the reason is that the title that we're using is the title as the story of Mikyo Dorje's liberation written by himself. But really, I think it's just a placeholder title. And I wonder, is it actually the title of the good deeds? And the reason is that there are several liberation stories of Mikyo Dorje that he wrote himself. So this title, saying that written by himself, it can't be just a particular title for the good deeds. So if you use the title given in the catalog of the collected works, and call the autobiographical verses called the good deeds, I think it will not be confusing, and one can easily understand the topic. So here, at this point, if you need to think about the life story of Karmapa Mika Dorje, so to explain who Karmapa Mika Dorje is, I think it's good to start with that. So first of all, when you say Karmapa Mika Dorje, when you say Karmapa, to explain that, the origin of the word Karmapa is as I described yesterday.
When we say
Karmapa, that is Karma is not Tibetan; it is Sanskrit. And if we translate that from Sanskrit into Tibetan, then it means lay or action, and then the pa is in Tibetan grammar a way of nominalizing it or making showing that it's a person. So Karmapa, when you join karma and pa, then you get the person who does the action, the person who does the action. And so Tibetans say, probably many Tibetans don't know that karma is actually Sanskrit, and they write it in Tibetan, and they write it. And when they write to me, they write various things. They write karma in many different ways, and they write it in many different ways. They write it in the same spelling as the words for stars. And some write it, and others spell it with different spelling. Some people give it at the same coloring of the word kar that means white. And so they spell it. And there's no point in me telling them not to write it like that. So I don't say anything about it. And from one perspective, there's no.
The
names, most of them are Tibetan. So they think that it's a Tibetan name and they write it as a Tibetan word. And we write it as a Tibetan word, then it ends up being wrong or it's strange like that, right? So when you say Mika Dorje, is the well-known name of the Karmapa of the 8th Karmapa. His entire name is Palden Chudujawa. And so that is his entire name, as His Holiness just said. And so when we give really long names to great Tibetan Lamas, so it's because the Tibetan Lamas have to read the names of Tibetan Lamas. You have to take a big breath first. It's like you run out of breath. It's like they're too long. It's like you have to have a long breath, and so it's a big joke. So when we call the Buddhas, the Tathagata, or the completely perfect Buddhas and so forth, we have different names for them. And the reason for this is that a single name cannot show all of the qualities of a great being. Because of some that a single name is unable to represent all of their qualities. And so for that reason, they have many different names, I think. Likewise, when you talk about Karmapa Mika Dorje, he has many different names. As Yangchen Gawa, or Yangchen Sampo, or Yangchen Sarma, Yangchen Shepa, and so forth. And Chudup Sampo and Chudup Trapa. And Chugi Trapa. He's also got a Karmapa Loda Chang. He has many different names. In particular, when we talk about the explanation of his name, there is a text written by Mika Dorje. There's a commentary by Paul Chungma, but there's not time to go through it all today, so I won't explain it all. So generally in Tibetan,
The
biographies of great Tibetan Lamas, we could call them biographies, this is normal. Instead, they're called by the word liberation stories. And there's a reason why they're called liberation stories. But so first, we need to understand what liberation or namtara means. Namtara comes from the Sanskrit word vimoksha. And so when this is translated into Tibetan, it means liberation or emancipation. Within the liberation story, the autobiographical liberation story of Jamgon Kota Lirutaya, it says that this can be classified into three according to the three types of beings, the great, middling, and lower. In terms of the lesser type of individual, there is liberation from rebirth in the three lower realms because of having pure faith and believing in karma and cause and effect. For the middling types of individuals, there's the way they achieve liberation from the ocean of samsara by way of having a pure wish for emancipation from all of samsara. For greater individuals, there is liberation from both extremes of existence and peace by way of having the pure altruistic intention to benefit others. So the books that tell these the histories or how they happen is these are what we call liberation stories. These extraordinary histories of the ways in which masters have liberated themselves from the suffering and its causes and freed other beings from their bonds are given the names liberation studies. And Acharya Arya Shurapada's Jatakatera says, please find that becoming a Sugata. Those who lack faith will gain faith, and they will be delighted with tales of Dharma. Basically, looking at the liberation stories of great beings from one perspective, we'll be able to know what is the path and what is not the path. And so those who lack faith will then develop faith and so forth. There are many different reasons. What he said is that the actual meaning of liberation stories is that they must become, through the form of the subject matter in the text, causes for the disciples who read and hear them to achieve liberation and omniscience. Basically, when we tell the liberation stories of great beings, both the speaker who's telling the liberation story and the listener who is hearing the liberation story understand why they're taught, their necessity. And then they need to do whatever they can. Sincere faith, the faith of longing, and the faith of convictions. And the best is all three of these, or only one of these types of faith. And if they can arouse faith, then we would say that the capacity of their family is awakened, or that a seed of liberation is planted. So for any sutra that we read, they always begin with the words, thus did I hear at one time. And so we always see these words, and we said, thus, this first word, when we say thus, there are many different explanations of it. But one of the most important ways it is explained is that when we say thus, or in this way, it teaches faith. And the reason for that is that it's saying the Buddha spoke thus, or the Buddha said this. And if you have faith in that, you'll develop belief and engage the Dharma. If you do not, you will not engage the Dharma. And so for this reason, Lochen Shunu So. So in Sanskrit, it's called Umarajiva. cited a sutra quoted in a commentary, in Nagarjuna's commentary of the Prajna Paramita verses that was translated into Chinese. Now, this is not in Tibet, but it is a commentary. It's a very long commentary of the 100,000, and if it was translated into Tibetan, it would be five or six volumes. And what it says is, it gives a sutra from it gives a citation from a sutra that says why that the word thus means faith, and it gives several different citations from this. And so I've taken a few of these and translated them into Tibetan, and so I thought I'd read them to you today. And so the first one says, faith is like a hand. If an individual has a hand, when they go to an island of jewels, they can pick up any jewel they like. Faith is similar. When you arrive at the island of the Buddha's Dharma with its jewels, and jhanas, you can take whichever you like. Lacking faith is like having no hands. A person with no hands, even if they get to an island of jewels, cannot pick up even one jewel. Lacking faith is similar. So that is one quote. So faith is like our hands. If you don't have like both hands, you get to this jewel arm, and you see that all around you there are many of the jewels and gemstones, but you can't even take a single piece. And it's the same. If you want to enter the teachings of Buddha, first you can't just enter them from the beginning. In order to, you're unable to enter the teachings and practice the Dharma, is what it's saying. Now, the second sutra quotation says, they will be able to enter the great ocean of my Dharma. They can achieve the results of the spiritual way. There's a point to shaving their head and wearing the Dharma robes. If they lack faith, they will not be able to the ocean of my Dharma. And just as a withered trunk will not ripen any fruit, they will not be able to achieve the results of the spiritual way. They might shave their heads, dye their robes, read many sutras, and become learned through questions and answers, but they will not achieve anything from the Dharma of the Buddha. So faith is like the most important, or the number one condition for entering the Dharma. And so that same great commentary in the 100,000-line sutra says, the Dharma of the Buddhas is profound and vast, so it is only the sphere of the Tathagatas. But if a person has faith, by the power of that faith, they will enter the Dharma of the Buddha and be able to enter. The Buddha's Dharma is so profound and vast that we are currently unable to realize nature and all of its reasons. So we're not able to realize that. But by the power of faith, we'll believe that what the Buddha said. And if we do this, then eventually to realize the entire profound and vast Dharma. And so for that reason, faith is extremely important for beginners. Like the presentations of karmic cause and effect are so fine and subtle that we can understand that. When we talk about, when the Buddha says that if you're generous and practice discipline, that will achieve, be reborn in the higher realms. This is just something we have to believe and actually practice. It's something that we cannot actually see ourselves and cannot know for ourselves. And so for this reason, for beginners, faith is extremely important. Likewise, the same commentary on the 100,000-line sutra relates how during the period after the Buddha awakened, there was a period when he did not teach the Dharma. And during that time, Brahma came down to the human realm and asked him to turn the wheel of Dharma. And so the first time he made this request, the Buddha replied that this Dharma is so profound and difficult for people to find that ordinary people would be unable to understand it. It wouldn't fit in their mind. They just know where they could understand it. When Brahma asked him a second time, the Buddha thought to himself, all Buddhas teach Dharma in order to tame sentient beings, and I should also do the same. So he turned the wheel of Dharma, and he promised to turn the wheel of Dharma. And at that point, then the Buddha said this first to Brahma. Today I've uncovered the flavor of Amrita nectar. All those with faith be delighted. I shall teach them this true Dharma. So he did say this first. So in this commentary that said to be written by Nagarjuna, what it said, that the Buddha said, all those with faith be delighted, but he did not say all those who are generous be delighted. Nor did he say all those who keep discipline be delighted, all those who practice patience be delighted, all you who are diligent be delighted, all you who meditate on dhyana be delighted. And he didn't say, oh, you have great progeny should be delighted. Instead, he only said all those with faith be delighted. And so what is the reason for this? The true Dharma is profound and subtle and beyond number and inconceivable. And so those with great progeny cannot realize it. So if there's great worldly progeny, they cannot realize it. So it is something that can only be realized by the omniscient. And without that, worldly people will not be able to immediately gain an understanding or realize the teachings of the Buddha. So how is it that ordinary people can enter the teachings of the Buddha? The capacity or the initial condition of that needs to be based upon faith. If they have faith, and only then will they be the Dharma. Merely being generous does not mean that you'll be able to enter the Dharma from the outset. And so for those with faith be delighted, as explains. And for that and other reasons, for us beginners who are just beginning to enter the gate of the Dharma, faith is extremely important. So now these two people say that so there's a citation that we often say that for beginners, that faith is important for beginners at the beginning, it's important in the middle. And so in any case, faith is really crucial. But however, these days, everyone thinks they need to examine everything, and they use like a pseudo logic to try to examine the entire nature of the true Dharma. And they think they realize this. But if we think like that, it's a bit arrogant and a bit prideful, I think. So the main thing that we as beginners need is faith, and relying on faith and devotion is extremely important. If we don't believe, then we're not even going to take any interest in the Dharma. So for that reason, faith is really important. So the main thing when we're thinking about what we need to have faith in terms of a story of liberation is whether a person has developed a practice in their being or the qualities of abandonment or realization. It's not like whether they're from a great class or clan, whether they're great in wealth and resources, whether they have many monks and nuns and many monasteries and nunneries, whether they're famous or have many students. And if we think those are the most important, then that cannot really be a liberation story of a great being. The stories of the great liberations should identify their qualities, such as how they have little desire and attachment for the world, their intelligence as a scholar, and their experience and realization as meditators. And so if it identifies and how their deeds in behalf of the teaching, lasting imprint. However, these days, instead of internal experience and realization, most consider the external appearance and things and that sort of buzz around it as important. And so if you enter Dharma, they say you're meek and powerless or inflexible and backward. And they think that people who say whatever comes to mind and do whatever they like are people who know how to think, people who get ahead and who are really brave. So many people talk like this, right? There's a quote about this by the sixth Shama Gaonchi Gyoncho. What he said is, I think that many people say they practice Dharma, but if someone's eternal practice, external conduct, and the qualities they produce do not match, then people really don't believe in them. So what he's saying is that generally, there are many people who say they're practicing Dharma, but the way they're thinking internally and their external understanding and the qualities that they produce, if they're all the same, people believe. And if they're not, then people really don't believe. These days, people say they're said to not be learned with raising button, or they're not very by perfecting discipline, or not accomplished having manner. They haven't even blocked the extreme existence. There are many who say they've accomplished practice of discipline. There are many people who think there aren't very many people who are learned with the reasoning blossoming from within, who are reaching the level of that. And nor are there many people who are venerable, who really perfect and keep their vows well. And there aren't many people who just stay very modestly on mountains meditating until they get old. There aren't anyone like that. And so what they do is they say, "Oh, I've achieved siddhi. I'm benefiting sentient beings." And they say that I'm practicing yoga discipline in various places. And so he said, I at first did not have such fortune for practice, so I needed appropriate for the level of my being. If I pretended to be someone who had abandoned everything, a Mahasiddha clairvoyant, it would have been possible from a worldly fool's perspective that I would gain some affluence. But having both affluence and qualities is best. But until that occurs, I choose qualities. So Chamachuki said, I don't have those. I'm not able to do that. I can't do it. So that is like appropriate for the level of my being. So generally, if I pretended to be someone who like powers, then I could people, and I could gain some affluence. But having both affluence and qualities is, of course, is best. But if I have to choose between those two, I'm going to choose qualities. And being affluent, having a big name and having a large retinue just don't help me at all. And so this is what he's saying. So it's similar like that. So the meaning of the liberation stories are like that when we speak about them. And for the listeners, we should understand this when we listen to them. If we don't, so I once heard a story about this. I don't know if this is a true story or not, but I heard this from someone else. Whether this is true or not, but it's really quite amusing. So at one time, there are a number of tulkus who visit the Dalai Lama to have their hair cut and so forth. And one day, and so the Dalai Lama said to the tulku, "What are the great qualities of the qualities of the greatness of the being?" Somebody said the great qualities of greatness. There was some Kampa attendants, and when they listened to this, what they said, they didn't understand. When they understood Chewa, great or big, I said big. Oh yes, he had a great quality. Yeah. The previous tulku, he was so big, he was so fat and so heavy. The Tibetan horses are small, but the horses from Sibig. So other than like just a big big horse from some, they can't carry him. And so the Dalai Lama said, no, I didn't mean that. I meant the qualities of abandonment and realization. They said, when they asked him that, Well, they asked the attendants didn't even know what he meant by saying the qualities of abandonment and realization, and so they didn't have anything to say. So someone told me this story. I don't know if this is true or not, but it is quite funny. Because sometimes we're like that, right? When you say about the great qualities of the Tibetan, or when we talk about, in Tibetan, it actually means the qualities of the greatness of the body is what is literally said. The qualities of the greatness. We don't understand what this means. There's many monasteries. They have many students, and other than that, they don't talk about whether they have whether they have loving kindness, compassion, whether they have. We'll take a 30-minute break.